She had everything money could buy: beauty, luxury, and a husband powerful enough to control the world. But one lie turned her paradise into a prison. He stole her name, her dignity, and left her with nothing. What he never imagined was that the woman he tried to silence would become the one to destroy him. This is the story of Isabella Moretti, the woman who proved that power isn't inherited, it's earned. The chandeliers sparkled above like frozen stars, filling the ballroom with an illusion of eternity. Isabella Moretti Kingsley moved between guests with the grace of someone trained to please. Every gaze admired her beauty, every whisper praised her poise. Yet behind that porcelain smile lived a woman imprisoned by silence. Her heart beat softly, drowned out by the music of other people's approval. She had once believed in love, or at least in partnership. But in the Kingsley mansion, affection was as rare as honesty. Edward Kingsley, her husband, commanded attention like a king ruling a fragile kingdom. His eyes saw assets, not souls. To the world, their marriage was a fairy tale. To her, it was a performance she could no longer bear. He was the architect of a global empire and the sculptor of her cage. Their lives were perfectly staged: the photo shoots, the galas, the interviews. Isabella played her role so well that even she began to forget where the mask ended and her skin began. Her silence wasn't compliance, it was survival. At night, when the guests left and the lights dimmed, she would walk barefoot through the halls. The portraits of Edward's ancestors watched her with cold disapproval. In those quiet hours, she allowed herself to remember the girl she used to be, the daughter of a Milanese tailor who stitched dreams into fabric. That girl had vanished somewhere between love and luxury. She wondered if anyone would ever notice that her laughter no longer reached her eyes. Her mother's voice echoed faintly in her mind. "Don't let them change your name, Isabella. It's the only thing they can't buy." She hadn't understood then how prophetic those words would be. The cracks in her perfect world began to show. Edward became more secretive, his phone calls more urgent, his absences longer. When she asked gentle questions, he deflected with affection, always just enough to keep her quiet. But her instincts, long silenced, began to whisper again. One evening, she found a stranger's perfume lingering on his suit jacket. Her breath caught, her throat burned. She said nothing, as always. Silence was safer. But deep inside, something trembled, not from fear this time, but from awakening. In public, she continued her performance flawlessly. Journalists adored her elegance. Investors envied her composure. Yet every compliment was another weight pressing against the truth she carried in secret. Behind the glamour, she was unraveling, and with each thread pulled, the mask loosened. The night ended as it always did, with her lying alone in a king-sized bed. Edward's side remained untouched, his absence a familiar companion. Outside, the city lights flickered like false promises. She closed her eyes, whispering to herself that tomorrow she'd open the window and finally breathe. But when dawn came, the air felt colder. The first fracture in her gilded world had appeared, invisible to all but her. The empire around her glittered as ever, but Isabella felt the truth beneath it. Everything beautiful in her life was built on borrowed lies. The morning began like every other sunlight gliding across polished marble, servants moving quietly through the halls. On her vanity lay a folder she didn't recognize, labeled in Edward's handwriting, "Sign and return." Curiosity outweighed obedience. She opened it, reading words she didn't understand, but sensing their danger. Her name was printed everywhere, binding her to something she didn't remember approving. That night she heard Edward's voice through the study door, low, sharp, impatient. "She doesn't suspect a thing," he murmured. The words froze her mid-step. A glass slipped from her hand, shattering softly against the rug. He hung up before she could breathe again. In that moment, every smile, every tender gesture began to rot in her memory. The next day, she walked into the Kingsley headquarters unannounced. Employees avoided her gaze, the air thick with discomfort. Once they would rise to greet her. Now whispers followed her down the corridor like ghosts. Her name had become a secret, something spoken only when she wasn't there to hear it. She found refuge in the archives, flipping through stacks of documents. Transactions, transfers, offshore accounts. Every page carried her signature, but she had never signed them. Her pulse quickened. Edward had used her as a shield, her innocence as his camouflage. The empire she thought they built together was founded on deceit written in her name. That night, she confronted him carefully, masking fear with curiosity. "Did you use my signature for something I didn't approve?" Edward smiled, the kind of smile that silences. "You wouldn't understand, darling. It's just business." His hand brushed hers, and she felt the cold metal of his wedding ring like a shackle. Her world began to shrink. Invitations stopped arriving. Friends grew scarce. The phone rang less. When she turned on the TV, reporters discussed a financial scandal involving anonymous sources, but one word cut through it all: forgery. She didn't need them to say her name. She already knew. She visited her mother seeking comfort. "You must leave him," Maria Luisa urged. But Isabella couldn't, not yet. There was too much she didn't know, and too much she still needed to find. Her mother's eyes glistened. "Then promise me this: if he takes your world, don't let him take your name." Isabella returned home and searched Edward's office again. Hidden beneath a stack of ledgers, she found the same document from her vanity this time, rewritten with higher stakes. Her name was no longer just a decoration. It was the foundation of Edward's empire. The weight of betrayal pressed against her chest. Sleep abandoned her. Night after night she stared at the ceiling, tracing cracks in the plaster that matched the fractures inside her heart. She had been a silent partner in her own destruction. But silence, she realized, was no longer protection, it was complicity. And when dawn arrived, Isabella didn't cry. She rose, walked to the mirror, and stared at herself with unfamiliar resolve. The woman looking back wasn't fragile anymore. Somewhere between deceit and despair, she had found something fierce, the beginning of strength. The gala shone brighter than any before. Crystal glasses chimed, cameras flashed, and Edward Kingsley stood beneath the golden lights like a monarch. Isabella wore a silver gown, her beauty effortless, her heart trembling beneath silk and diamonds. She believed this night might heal what was broken between them. Instead, it became the stage for her undoing. As the orchestra silenced, Edward's voice filled the room. "I regret to announce that my wife will no longer represent Kingsley Holdings," he declared. Gasps rippled through the crowd. He spoke of fraud, of betrayal, painting Isabella as the root of a scandal she didn't even know existed. Every word stabbed deeper, slicing through her dignity. Reporters surged forward. Questions, cameras, flashes, chaos erupted. Isabella froze, unable to breathe. Edward placed a hand on her shoulder, feigning pity, and whispered, "You'll thank me later." The cruelty in his calm tone shattered her completely. The ballroom's gold turned to ash in her eyes. When she returned home, her reflection mocked her. The television replayed Edward's speech on every channel, repeating her humiliation to the world. The staff avoided her. Her phone filled with messages not of comfort, but curiosity. She realized, with bone-deep clarity, that the world believed him, and she had no one to defend her. That night she sat alone in the dark, staring at the glittering city below. The tears wouldn't come. They were replaced by something sharper, silent, so heavy it became armor. Beneath that quiet, a thought began to bloom. If Edward wanted war, she would learn to fight, but this time she would use the very weapon he gave her, her name. The next morning, headlines screamed her disgrace. "Isabella Kingsley under investigation." The press swarmed her gate, desperate for a reaction. Her once adored image was torn apart, her reputation reduced to gossip fodder. Every door that once opened easily now slammed shut. The empire had exiled its queen. Banks froze her accounts. Friends vanished overnight, their loyalty evaporating like perfume in the wind. Even the staff she trusted avoided her gaze. Isabella walked through her mansion like a ghost haunting her own life. The silence that had once protected her now suffocated her. She began to understand what true isolation felt like. In the midst of despair, a letter arrived, no return address, only a name: Sebastian Carter. Inside, a simple message read, "I believe you. Meet me." Suspicion wrestled with hope. For the first time in weeks, her pulse quickened for something other than fear. Someone believed her a stranger in a world that had turned its back. She met Sebastian in a quiet cafe, far from cameras. His voice was calm, his eyes steady. "I've reviewed your files," he said. "You were framed and the evidence leads back to your husband." The words were a spark in the darkness. Isabella felt her chest tighten, disbelief and relief merging into fragile courage. When she returned home, she stood before her mirror again. The woman reflected there was bruised by betrayal, but not broken. Her eyes, once clouded with fear, held a flicker of resolve. For the first time, she whispered her own name, Isabella Moretti, reclaiming what he tried to erase. And for the first time, it sounded powerful. Days passed in muted agony until Isabella finally agreed to meet Sebastian again. They sat in his modest office, a sharp contrast to the marble palaces she once knew. His walls were lined with files, not paintings. His voice grounded, not rehearsed. "He used your name to sign illegal transfers," he explained gently. "But if we act now, we can prove it." Each word felt like oxygen filling lungs starved for truth. Sebastian's kindness was unfamiliar. He didn't pity her, he respected her. "You're not weak," he said once, after noticing her trembling hands. "You were lied to." For the first time, someone separated her from her mistakes. She began to see that fragility wasn't failure, it was what came before rebirth. His presence was a quiet reminder that not all men sought to own her. Together, they combed through documents late into the night. Isabella's eyes burned, her back ached, but her determination grew sharper with every page. Each signature she found in her own handwriting felt like a wound, yet also a clue, a step closer to justice. The empire Edward built on her name was now being dismantled by her hands. One evening, Sebastian handed her a file labeled "Offshore Accounts, Confidential." Inside were copies of transactions Edward had hidden. "This could destroy him," Sebastian said. But Isabella hesitated. She didn't want revenge, she wanted truth. Yet deep down, she knew truth and destruction often came together. When she left his office that night, the city lights shimmered differently. They no longer mocked her, they challenged her. The wind was cold, but she didn't pull her coat tighter. For the first time in months, she walked without bowing her head. Somewhere in the darkness, she found her reflection not as Edward's wife, but as Isabella Moretti, the woman learning how to rise. The mansion felt foreign now, a museum of lies frozen in time. Isabella moved through its corridors like a detective in her own home, tracing Edward's deceit through every drawer and safe. She found files, phone logs, coded messages, all evidence of his double life. Each discovery was both a knife and a key, cutting through the past but unlocking the truth. One evening, she entered his private study and uncovered a locked drawer. Inside lay a single envelope with her name written in his sharp handwriting. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photocopies of contracts, all forged, all bearing her signature. Edward had planned everything, even the scandal that destroyed her. Rage pulsed beneath her calm. When Sebastian saw the evidence, he looked at her with admiration. "You found what most wouldn't dare to look for." She smiled faintly, the sadness in her eyes slowly hardening into focus. "He thought I was too delicate to understand," she whispered. "Now I understand everything." It was no longer a story of betrayal, it was a story of reclamation. But Edward wasn't blind. He began to notice her absence during the day, her quiet defiance at dinner. "You're distracted," he said one night, his tone deceptively gentle. "Is there something I should know?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Only that I finally do." It was the first time she'd ever seen him unsettled. Later, in her room, Isabella packed away the forged papers in a hidden compartment beneath her floorboards. Her reflection in the mirror looked calmer than she felt, but also stronger than she remembered. The war had begun, and though she was still healing, she now carried the most dangerous weapon of all, the truth. Rumors began to spread in the business world like wildfire. The Kingsley Empire trembled under whispers of fraud and betrayal, though no one dared say Edward's name aloud. Isabella watched the chaos unfold from the shadows, each headline both a wound and a warning. She knew that every move she made now had to be precise. One mistake could destroy her before she could destroy him. Late one evening, Sebastian called her with a warning. "Edward knows someone's digging," he said. "Be careful, Isabella, he's dangerous when cornered." She felt the chill of truth in his voice. The man she once loved was gone. In his place stood a predator protecting his throne. Still, fear was no longer enough to stop her, it was fuel. When she arrived home, Edward was waiting. "You've been busy," he said, sipping whiskey, eyes sharp as glass. His words hung heavy in the air. Isabella felt her pulse quicken, but refused to look away. "I've learned to keep myself informed," she replied softly. A dangerous smile curved his lips. "Good. You'll need that skill for survival." After he left, she collapsed into her chair, trembling. The room smelled of his cologne, cold and bitter. For a moment, the old Isabella, the obedient wife, tried to resurface, whispering that she should flee, but another voice, newer and stronger, rose above it. "No more running." She wiped her tears, stood, and began scanning documents again. By dawn, exhaustion gave way to focus. She had mapped every account, every lie, every forged signature. The fear that had once paralyzed her had transformed into resolve. Edward might control the world outside, but inside these walls, she now held the truth, and truth, she realized, was the one weapon even power feared. Days turned into weeks, and Isabella's silence became her strategy. She smiled at dinners, attended charity events, played her role flawlessly, all while dismantling his empire piece by piece. Every interaction became a chess move. Every word she spoke was calculated. The woman Edward once dismissed as fragile had become his most dangerous opponent. The confrontation came unexpectedly. He found her in the study, going through old files. "Looking for something?" His voice was smooth, his smile sharp. She closed the drawer slowly, meeting his gaze. "Answers," she said. He chuckled. "You wouldn't understand the complexity of my work." She took a step closer, her eyes unwavering. "Try me." For the first time, Edward hesitated. The softness he once used to control her no longer worked. "You're angry," he said, feigning calm. "You should be careful. Anger makes people reckless." Isabella tilted her head slightly. "So does arrogance." The silence that followed was heavier than any scream. It was the moment he realized she wasn't his pawn anymore. That night, Isabella stood before her mirror, the same one that once reflected her submission. Now it reflected something entirely different: power. She touched her reflection, her expression steady. "He broke me," she whispered, "but he also built me." The irony wasn't lost on her. Sometimes destruction was the only path to rebirth. In the morning, she slipped on her wedding ring one last time, not as a symbol of love, but as a reminder. Every scar, every lie, every humiliation had forged her into something unstoppable. The mirror hadn't just broken, it had revealed who she truly was beneath the glass, and that woman was ready to fight. The house that once symbolized her captivity now became her battlefield. Isabella converted the grand dining room into a war room, papers spread across the long marble table. Every document, every receipt, every transfer had a story to tell. Her trembling hands were steadied by purpose. Fear had long since turned into focus. She was no longer the woman he silenced. She was the storm he created. Sebastian visited frequently, helping her build the legal case that could expose Edward's empire. His admiration was quiet, but constant. "You're doing what entire teams failed to do," he said once. Isabella smiled faintly, exhaustion shadowing her beauty. "I'm doing what I should have done long ago, learning who he really is." For the first time, her voice carried conviction, not pain. The investigation revealed horrors, hidden accounts, false charities, secret partners. Edward's web of deceit stretched wider than she imagined. Each truth she uncovered was a blade cutting through her past. "He made me his shield," she said, almost in disbelief. "But I'll make myself his end." The fire in her tone startled even Sebastian. At night, loneliness still crept in a haunting companion. But now, instead of weakness, she found clarity in solitude. She read law books, watched trial recordings, and took notes until dawn. The woman who once feared boardrooms now understood contracts better than most lawyers. Knowledge became her rebellion. One evening, as she closed another ledger, Isabella looked out at the city lights, the same skyline that had once mocked her. "He thought he owned my silence," she murmured. "He never realized silence can be the loudest threat." The reflection in the window smiled back, no longer fragile but formidable. Edward sensed the shift before seeing it. Her calmness unnerved him. Her silence screamed louder than any accusation. He began to move carefully, like a man walking through fog hiding a cliff. But his arrogance still blinded him. He believed she would never have the courage to confront him. That illusion would soon end. One of Edward's closest executives, a woman named Victoria Hale, reached out to Isabella in secret. "He's losing control," she warned. "And when he falls, he'll take everyone with him." Victoria offered internal documents that could destroy Edward completely, but in exchange she wanted protection and immunity. Trusting her was a gamble Isabella couldn't afford to lose. When Sebastian reviewed Victoria's evidence, his expression darkened. "This proves everything," he said. "But if you use it, it'll bring down more than Edward innocent people too." Isabella hesitated, staring at the files. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from conscience. Justice demanded sacrifice. The question was, whose? That night, Isabella stood at her balcony, watching lightning flash over the skyline. "You can't fight monsters without becoming one," Sebastian had said earlier. His words echoed painfully, but as the wind whipped her hair, she realized something she'd already fought her monster. What came next wasn't destruction, it was liberation. In the morning, she sealed the files inside a metal case and handed them to Sebastian. "We'll use them," she said calmly, "but not to destroy, to expose." Her decision marked the end of innocence and the beginning of power. The shadows of loyalty were fading, and what remained was light sharp, undeniable, and hers alone. Days blurred together until the moment Sebastian burst into the office, his eyes burning with triumph. "We found it," he said, placing a folder on the desk. Inside lay the marriage contract, a clause Edward had overlooked. Legally, Isabella was the co-owner of half the Kingsley Empire. Her hands trembled as she traced her name across the paper. The same signature he had used to destroy her would now become her weapon. For a long time, she couldn't speak. The irony of it all pressed like a weight against her chest. The empire that had buried her reputation was half hers by law, and she had never realized it. Sebastian watched her quietly, knowing this discovery was more than legal leverage. It was vindication. "He took your voice," Sebastian said softly. "Now you'll use his to reclaim it." Isabella spent the night crafting a plan. She reviewed every public file, every shareholder document, every press release. By morning, she knew exactly where and when to strike at the next global board meeting, which Edward had organized to stabilize his crumbling reputation. The thought of facing him publicly made her pulse race, but she didn't flinch. She had bled enough in silence. Edward's arrogance worked in her favor. He didn't suspect that the woman he tried to erase would ever stand against him. To the world, she was still the fallen wife, broken and forgotten. That illusion was her armor. For once, she was grateful for their underestimation. Let them see fragility. They would never see the blade behind it. As dawn broke, Isabella stood at her window, the city below waking to another day of chaos. She pressed her hand against the glass and whispered, "My name built this. My name will end it." The reflection that looked back at her wasn't the same woman Edward married. This was the rebirth of Isabella Moretti, the name he could no longer control. The boardroom glimmered with tension and polished steel. Edward stood at the head of the table, mask of confidence in place, oblivious to the storm approaching. Cameras rolled, investors murmured, and the air crackled with anticipation. Then, the doors opened and Isabella walked in. Silence fell like a curtain. Every eye turned to the ghost, who refused to stay buried. Edward's smirk faltered for the first time. "Isabella," he said, his voice low, cautious. "This isn't your place." She stopped across from him, laying a stack of folders on the table. "You're right," she said softly. "It's our place. legally. The murmurs exploded around the room. She opened the documents, revealing the clause that tied her to half the company and every crime committed under her forged signature. Gasps filled the room as screens flashed with evidence: wire transfers, offshore accounts, falsified audits. Edward's face drained of color. "You don't know what you're doing," he spat. Isabella's calm smile was sharper than any accusation. "I know exactly what I'm doing. I'm telling the truth you taught me to hide." Every word landed like a strike against his empire. Security entered as the board demanded an explanation. Cameras captured Edward's fury, his shouts, his unraveling composure. Isabella didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her silence had become her weapon, her name, her proof. As Edward was escorted out, she simply whispered, "You should have remembered I was never yours to destroy." When it was over, the room remained frozen in awe. Investors approached her cautiously, not out of pity but respect. Isabella gathered her documents and walked out into the sunlight. For the first time, the world saw her not as Edward's wife or victim, but as the woman who brought down a king. And for Isabella Moretti, that was victory enough. The silence after Edward's downfall was deafening. For months, Isabella had dreamed of this moment: justice, freedom, redemption. Yet when it came, it didn't feel like triumph. It felt like aftermath. The mansion was emptier than ever, its walls echoing with ghosts of her old life. Freedom, she realized, wasn't peace. It was responsibility, and it demanded everything she had left. Her name was cleared in the press, but whispers still lingered. Some called her brave, others called her ruthless. The same world that condemned her now wanted interviews, photos, exclusives. Isabella refused them all. She had spent too long being someone else's story. Now, she wanted silence, not as armor this time, but as choice. Sebastian stayed by her side through the storm of recovery. "You won," he reminded her one night as they watched the city lights together. She shook her head softly. Winning isn't the same as healing. He understood. The woman beside him was not the same one he'd met months ago. Her voice was steadier, her eyes wiser, her heart still mending but alive. The world moved on, but Isabella lingered between past and future. There were days she still woke expecting Edward's voice in the hall. There were nights she still felt anger burning under her ribs. But slowly she learned to breathe again, to eat, to sleep, to exist for herself. Every small act of normalcy became an act of defiance. One afternoon she visited her mother in Milan. Maria Luisa opened the door and pulled her into a long, silent embrace. No words were needed. Isabella's tears fell freely for the first time in months, not of pain, but release. "You kept your name," her mother whispered, "and you gave it value." For the first time, Isabella believed her. Months later, the world saw a headline it didn't expect. Moretti Group announces launch of ethical luxury brand. Isabella stood before cameras again, not as the scandalized wife, but as the CEO of her own creation. Every stitch of her company's designs told her story: strength woven from fragility, truth from deceit, beauty from resilience. Her name no longer carried Edward's shadow. It carried light. At the launch event, journalists asked if she missed her old life. Isabella smiled gently. "No," she said. "That life taught me how to survive. This one will teach me how to live." The applause that followed wasn't for glamour, it was for courage. Even Sebastian, standing quietly at the back, smiled with pride as she commanded the room with effortless grace. After the event, Isabella walked through her new office, sunlight pouring over walls lined with art from female creators. "This is what he never understood," she said softly. "Power doesn't come from ownership. It comes from creation." Each corner of the space reflected her transformation: elegance without arrogance, strength without cruelty. Her relationship with Sebastian deepened, though it was built on mutual respect, not dependency. He didn't save her, he witnessed her rebirth. Their hands often brushed but didn't need to cling. "You could have destroyed him completely," he once said. Isabella smiled faintly. "I already did by surviving him." That night she sat by the window of her office, gazing at the skyline that once symbolized her prison. Now it shimmered with possibility. For the first time in years, she felt no bitterness, no fear, only peace. Her empire was no longer built on his lies, but on her truth. And the woman reflected in the glass was everything she had fought to become: whole, powerful, and free. The morning began quietly, sunlight spilling across Isabella's desk as she reviewed new design sketches. The office was alive with soft laughter, the hum of creation, the sound of a life rebuilt. For once, the world outside didn't feel threatening. Everything she had lost had given her something greater: clarity. Yet, beneath the calm, fate waited patiently, carrying one last message she didn't expect. Her assistant entered with the mail, a single envelope set apart from the rest, no return address, sealed with wax. Isabella hesitated before opening it. The paper was thick, the handwriting elegant but unfamiliar. Inside, a single line: Edward was only the beginning. Beneath it, a list of account numbers, foreign, hidden, untouched. Her breath caught. The ink shimmered like a warning from the past refusing to die. She sat back in silence, the city glittering through the glass. Part of her wanted to burn the letter, to let the ghosts stay buried. But another part, the same fire that had carried her through betrayal, refused to ignore it. Truth had always found her, even when she didn't seek it, and this truth, she sensed, would demand more courage than any before. Sebastian entered moments later, reading the tension on her face. She handed him the letter wordlessly. He scanned it, eyes narrowing. This could mean there are others," he said quietly. Isabella nodded, calm but resolute. "Then we'll find them," she replied, "one name at a time." The words felt like a vow, not of vengeance, but of justice. That night, Isabella stood on her balcony, the wind lifting her hair like silk. The city lights flickered below, fragile yet enduring. She smiled faintly, feeling the weight of her name settle over her shoulders once more, not as a burden, but as purpose. "He thought he owned my name," she whispered into the night. "But my name was never his to claim." And somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled not as a threat, but as applause. In the end, Isabella didn't win by taking revenge. She won by taking her power back. Her name, once used to destroy her, became the symbol of everything she rebuilt. Tell me in the comments, what would you do if someone tried to steal your story? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story if you believe that strength can rise even from betrayal.